Hello, friends.
Hello.
Hey, Patrick. Hey, congrats on the big news.
Yeah, Miami Coin is happening, so it really is a community effort. We got a bunch of people who are contributing, designing, doing all this stuff. It's been fun.
What's the big news exactly, Patrick? Share with all of us.
Oh, sure. Miami Coin is going to begin mining on August 3rd. And so essentially like 20 miners can initiate mining. And it actually dovetails nicely into this conversation today because what the CityCoins community, which is kind of working to build Miami Coin, is using is this kind of like simplified version of proof of transfer, which is the kind of developer superpower that I think a lot of developers are going to start using on stacks. And so, our community is kind of guinea pigging that tech, and we're really excited about it. We think we have something special.
Awesome. Yeah, I did get the email today. I'm looking forward to following the updates and kind of learning more once you guys start speaking outwardly about it.
You can feel the excitement in Discord already. Everyone's applauding the news. Exciting stuff. Looks like we're just waiting for Dan to join, but we have Hank on right now.
Hey everybody. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to see you.
Hey, yeah, great to see you too.
And Patrick, excited about the launch. I feel like this idea of like doing a mining only launch like takes you all the way back to our Bitcoin launch. Yeah, take lessons from Satoshi. I think it's actually like crazy. I think it's like a decade or so to 12 years since Satoshi launched Bitcoin. And there's still so many lessons to be learned. It's like people make mistakes. And it's like, oh, actually, you could have done this like Satoshi did it. So mining only is underrated. So there is this theory, right? Like I'm sharing it partly as a joke, but I think there's some truth to the underlying lessons in it. So the theory is that Satoshi is actually a time traveler, and the design of Bitcoin actually is informed by all the experiences that the industry is going to experience over the next 3, 4, 5 decades. And Satoshi actually is a time traveler who came back and said, here's the perfect design. Because every effort to improve the design of Bitcoin, you actually discover that you are making something else worse. And that something else that's becoming worse is way, way worse than the original thing that you were trying to improve, right? So the same thing with mining. I feel like a lot of people tried launching new assets in different ways, stacks included, right? But just doing a pure mining launch might actually be the simplest, most fair, best way to bootstrap a community and a network. Yeah, totally. No primary issuer. There's it's fair for everyone. And it's definitely tempting. It's definitely tempting to do pre-mines and things like that. But I think you may end up going further, longer, in terms of like the health of the network. In certain scenarios, by doing a mining only launch, especially if it's launched in the right way, like you're just kicking something out and saying, okay, people can just mine this, whatever, and then don't continuously give it attention. Like, yeah, it could die, but yeah, just avoiding greed can pay off dividends. Yep, and I think the other distinction I would make there is sometimes people would just have a smart contract and anyone can just send a transaction there to buy tokens, but that's not mining, right? Like that's still almost like a transaction to buy something that doesn't work on the network, and it's not like miners are doing continuous work and earning the token for that work. The other setup actually looks more like a investment, right? That you're sending Bitcoin and you're buying like something else with it, but that something else doesn't have value yet and might have value in the future. Whereas mining is like you're doing some work to run the network and you're continuously doing that work, and the only way that these new tokens are coming online is because of the work that is done. Should we sort of kick off and maybe maybe a good way to kick off is just go around and introduce ourselves. I guess the sort of new speaker, Hank. I don't know if Dan is joining. Anyone else?
Dan's gonna be joining in just a bit, but yeah, let's definitely get it kicked off. Frankie, if you want to go ahead, feel free to.
All right, friends, happy Thursday, and I hope it's been such a great day for you. On behalf of Crypto Internet, we are super excited that your curiosity has brought you here today for this topic. The plan for our conversation today is going to focus on proof of transfer and why developers believe it's their new superpower. For those of you just learning about proof of transfer, let me quickly size it up to other popular consensus mechanism in other blockchains. The Bitcoin blockchain, for example, uses proof of work, which requires miners to spend energy, whereas Ethereum uses proof of stake, which requires participants to dedicate a number of their financial resources to secure that network. Stacks, on the other hand, a layer 1 blockchain, uses proof of transfer to secure the blockchain to Bitcoin as the source of trust. At the end of this conversation, you're gonna have the opportunity to ask follow-up questions, so hang tight. All right, let's get into it. Introducing our host for the evening, Patrick Stanley, CEO of Freehold, and Muneeb Ali, founders of Stacks and CEO of Hiro. I'll let you two take it away.
Thanks. Oh, thanks. So I think I suggested this topic, proof of transfer, a superpower for developers, because I think over the past 6 months, since Stacks itself as a blockchain uses proof of transfer, and we'll get into what that is, we sort of noticed like it's been incredibly successful in terms of bootstrapping a new network, as a new consensus mechanism, and I think a lot of people who understand what it's all about really appreciate its benefits. And I think I know there's an opportunity to sort of generalize proof of transfer for developers to use it themselves. So the idea is like, if it's good enough for the Stacks blockchain, it should be good enough for developers who want to sort of use that same mechanism. I would love. I think what might make sense is if Muneeb wanted to kind of go into what proof of transfer is, and we could sort of kick off a conversation around like its benefits and how developers, including some of the speakers here, are using proof of transfer as a superpower. Yeah, I'm happy to give a little bit of a background there, and I think before getting into any of the technical details, I think it's important to understand like what the intentions were and where were we coming from. And I think there is, and we see this in crypto all the time. Like there are so many different ecosystems. Everyone has their reasons for why you should come and build in this ecosystem and not the other. And in some ways, like, it's easier to actually start a separate new blockchain. Like you could be like, you have more control, you're going to design that blockchain however you want to design it. But early on, like, so I started in crypto in 2013. Early on, it was like very clear that if you do start a separate ecosystem, eventually you're going to start competing with the other ecosystems. And it's basically mostly because of the economic interest. Right? So imagine like a proof of work network. Classic example would be Bitcoin versus Bitcoin Cash versus some other fork of Bitcoin. people have to decide which network they're on. If you're on one network or you're a supporter of one network, you're not a supporter of another network. But in terms of hash power, if you're basically trying to build up a computing base for Bitcoin's proof of work, you might not invest in like some other people, right? So you have to make that decision. And I think Satoshi had this type of foresight that this dynamic, this incentive structure could be problematic, right? So that's why I think the code in the Genesis block of stacks is so appropriate, because it's a Satoshi code, which basically says something like, that you can have new use cases that all share the compute power of Bitcoin. Because once you switch that, like for a minute, imagine that Ethereum was actually sharing the compute power of Bitcoin, right? I think that's a very different dynamic. Like if Ethereum needed Bitcoin for its survival, that it couldn't exist without Bitcoin, like the two communities would actually be very, very different, and their economic alignment would be very, very different as well. Right? And I think that's where we come from, because we think that, as much as experimentation is great and people are trying all these different ideas, at some point there is going to be consolidation. At some point, you're going to start seeing network effects around certain ecosystems, and we want to align ourselves with the things that we think is the most durable, is the most secure, and is the most likely to be around 50 years from now, 100 years from now, and that's Bitcoin. So with that background in mind, the technical problem that we were trying to solve is that these new blockchains, new types of use cases, they require some sort of a proof of X, like either it's like proof of funds or stake, right, or proof of work done in whatever way, whatever hash algorithm you use. It's usually like they're participants, and you want to rate limit the people who can come in and get a finite resource, right? And that's kind of like where the need comes from. And we're saying we want to do it in a way that it connects you to Bitcoin from an economic alignment perspective. And I think we iterated over this and landed on proof of transfer, which actually, frankly, I think turned out to be a much bigger superpower than even we initially thought. Right? Because what it really does, like for example, when we were designing it, we never thought of it as like, oh, actually this solves Bitcoin's energy efficiency as well, right? Because we're not burning electricity. There can be thousands of transactions on the stack side, but they're just being represented as hashes on the Bitcoin side. So there is a economic cost to attack stacks, but there isn't a carbon footprint of that economic cost. And that's super interesting, right? So proof of transfer is basically like you only need to go through the step of burning electricity to produce a scarce asset once, and that's enough, right? Everything else can then use that scarce asset. Now you're kind of like, think of this as, this might be a bad analogy, but you're typing on your keyboard. You're actually transmitting your like energy in the physical space into mechanical energy on the keyboard, and then you've typed up an email. Like once you've typed up the email and somebody else wants to type up the same email, they can just copy paste that text, because now it's in digital format and it's way easier to copy paste it. They don't have to go through the energy expenditure of converting energy into mechanical energy on a keyboard again. And copy pasting, once it's digital, is way easier, right? So we have already gone from the hard step of physical energy on the planet, however the miner was consuming electricity, to a digital representation of that energy, which is Bitcoin. Right? And now the other use cases like Stacks or Miami Coin or other, they can just use that. And it's way more efficient and way more programmable if you just use that directly versus trying to go through the mechanical process again. Right? Let me pause there, and then I'll let others chime in, and then I want to talk about another aspect of business transfer, which is about the rewards that you earn and how does it change the economic life. You should go ahead. All right. So I think the next thing it does is that one of the biggest things in crypto is, I think there's a Cambrian explosion of all these different assets. And, again, I think it's great that so much experimentation is happening. People are trying all sorts of ideas. Obviously, there are going to be some bad actors, some scams, some kind of like hyped up things like that. But in the end, there are going to be some really high quality projects, novel things, exciting things that are going to just change the world. And I choose to focus on the fact that some of these things are going to change the world versus focusing on the long tail of scamming things out there, right? So there are going to be all sorts of assets out there, but then it's hard for people to value these assets, right? Like you see a lot of criticism that what is the value based on, right? And interestingly, a side benefit of linking things to Bitcoin is that that new asset is worth at least as much as the Bitcoin that it is earned, right? Like forget about the additional value in that asset. It has a base value, right? You know what the floor is. This thing is worth at least the amount of Bitcoin I can earn. Right? Suddenly, it's not turtles on turtles on turtles anymore, right? Now you have ground somewhere, right? You just all have to agree that that ground is Bitcoin, which I actually think is a good thing for the world. If the world starts to agree that the unit of measurement is Bitcoin, and there's consensus, widespread consensus around the world, I think that is a completely revolutionary thing. So what that does is that by having these new types of assets that are now grounding themselves in the reality of Bitcoin, stacks is the first one, right? With stacks, you have a certain Bitcoin yield, and you could argue from a purely economical perspective that your stacks are worth at least as much as the Bitcoin that you're earning. You can just discount the rest of the value, but still that argument would hold, right? What if you can have other assets like that? I see Dan here as well. His work on boomboxes, where NFTs can earn a yield. Yes, there are details right now that the yield is actually in stacks, but then the stacks themselves would have a Bitcoin yield. Or maybe in the future you have some sort of a Bitcoin derivative or a Bitcoin pegged asset, so you can directly earn Bitcoin there. But the point is, now you can apply the same argument to NFTs. That NFTs are at least worth as much as the Bitcoin yield that they're, right? So these are the building blocks of almost like a new financial system where people can't argue that it's like just turtles on turtles on turtles. Like you could actually point to something. You can say that my thesis is that Bitcoin is the most valuable asset on the planet. Bitcoin is the best store of value on the planet. And there are a lot of people who believe what I believe. And I want to earn Bitcoin. I want to hold Bitcoin, and I want to build on Bitcoin, right? And my asset that I'm building, I want to link it to Bitcoin because my asset is also going to have a Bitcoin yield, and it is actually going to benefit from the security of Bitcoin. And we will build, because we're building on top of Bitcoin, we are actually contributing to going towards that future where Bitcoin is the most valuable asset on the planet, right? So it's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy if a lot of developers doing that, right? And I actually think that there are very strong incentives for people to do that. That brings me to PUX and Miami Coin, because there are ways, like so you've now gone through the mechanical or the physical world of burning some electricity and getting Bitcoin, and now you enter the world of stacks, right? So on the Bitcoin side, it's a little bit like it's a simpler computing environment. Like you can't do much over there. It's very secure, very hard to change. And now now you're on the stack side where you have clarity language. You can write general purpose smart contracts. It's a little bit faster because you're micro blocks, and you can actually do more interesting things. Right. So over there, once you start creating almost like a a simulated, I don't want to call it simulated proof of transfer, but let's say a proof of transfer light or something, where you're just replicating that, because people have stacks and they're willing to spend them, there's an economic vector to mining. Like, you don't have to burn electricity, you could just spend the stacks, right? And you're mining a new asset like Miami Coin. Interestingly, you could, because those holders of the Miami Coin are now earning stacks by proxy Bitcoin, because they could just lock it, or even the protocol could just automatically lock the stacks for a year, and just give you the Bitcoin yield. Like, people actually get the same type of economic incentives that they're experiencing from stacks directly. But at this layer, this is infinitely scalable, right? Because there could be Miami Coin, there could be New York Coin, there could be other things, there could be new types of apps, new types of social networks, whatever you want to do. You can launch these things and directly link it back by proxy through stacks into a Bitcoin yield, right? And it's not just the yield. Because these transactions are happening on the stack side, and these transactions are getting packaged up and there's a hash written on Bitcoin, like, you're getting the benefits of having a record of your decentralized, in this case, Miami Coin on Bitcoin, right? And I think that thing is extremely important because, again, going back to this worldview where there's so many different blockchains, so many different experiments happening, like, what happens 5 years from now, 10 years from now, if the blockchain you were building on is no longer working? Well, if you apply that to stacks, let's say some catastrophic things happen on the stack side. The history of like what happened on stacks in the past will be anchored to Bitcoin. So you could easily roll back in time, and as long as Bitcoin is there, right, you can actually verify that at a certain point in time, this was exactly what the history was, and you can try to restart it. And this is not that easy to do on a system where you could reach a stage where no one can tell what the real truth even was. Because, for example, in the proof of stake system, if the malicious people gain enough control, they could actually create 1 billion different copies of the history, right? And there's no way for anyone to tell what actually happened in the past. Because how would you prove, like, out of 1 billion copies, which one is real, which one is not? So I think it's benefits like that where you suddenly start grounding to like a bedrock of truth, which is Bitcoin, like a bedrock of economic value, like a unit of measurement, and then actually build on top of it, right? So that's the aspect that I find like really fascinating and really interesting.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree. I think like Bitcoin definitely is like a ledger of record and a bedrock of truth that I think you can build on with confidence for decades. And if you're building, quote unquote, civilization level software, where municipalities or even countries have to rely on it, Bitcoin is kind of the obvious choice. And, Clarity, smart contract language is super secure. And, it's almost like if you were programming like, nuclear codes or something, or or something really high stakes, like, hundreds of millions of dollars, you'd want the most secure programming language you could use. And so, Citycoins is essentially built on Bitcoin's bedrock via stacks and built with Clarity, smart contracting language.
Yep, I can comment a little bit on how I view Citycoins. Like, that might be pretty much the same or a little bit different from how other people view it. But I really think of this as trying to push local governments into the digital age. Like a little bit background there first, right? So I'm a big believer in cities, right? I think actually the concept of countries is strange, like partly because I grew up in Pakistan, and we have the Walker in the audience as well, who's who's a VP of technology at Hiro, and he grew up on the India side, right? And if you look at the map there, like someone actually draw lines across regions, like Punjab is one of the regions, where it has a rich history going back like thousands of years, where people have been living there and they're interconnected and so on. And somebody just drew a line that now this line is on the Pakistan side and this line is on the India side, right? And kind of like separated those connections, which are very natural. But if you think about cities are actually a much organic, much more natural way of self-organizing than countries. Like countries could actually have, vastly different types of people who are basically kind of like stuck together, right? But not in cities. Like people are choosing to go to a city, and and so if you think about cities and how to make like the local governments more powerful, and in some ways the state should not be too powerful, right? Because the state actually is inefficient because it's trying to do things at the wrong level of scope, right? But cities can be extremely powerful if they are done right. So the opportunity I see with city coins is a little bit like trying to push these local governments into the digital age, where they discover the power of crypto. They discover the power of having crypto treasuries, right? And they discover the power of earning Bitcoin. Like imagine that you could not only like have a revenue stream that is going to different causes to the city government, but imagine the amount of education that would happen. Imagine the amount of learning people would have to go through, the kind of software upgrades they would have to do to understand this new world. And then imagine having like a public ticker on the performance of those local government officials. Like imagine, like San Francisco, for example, that is known for bad local policies. Imagine every time a new bad policy comes up, the public ticker for San Francisco actually takes a massive hit because people are like dumping the San Francisco coin because they're like, I don't agree with these policies. This city is like going down the drain. I want out, right? That's like a public's like signal. Like if people remember during the elections, I think FTX was running these futures on is Trump going to win or somebody else going to win, like that. And those futures were actually pretty accurate because people's money was on the line. And over here, you time like the performance of a city with some sort of a public ticker, and I think that's very powerful, right? And then they're going to feel the pain because their Bitcoin earnings are going to go down. They're going to feel the pain because their treasury is going to become less valuable. Whereas on the flip side, if you're forward-looking leaders like the mayor of Miami, and who's very aggressive on accepting technology and like making the right policy, a lot of people would want to be a part of that. People who are moving there, they'll be like, yeah, I support this government, I support these policies. I like the fact that, there's a strong treasury. If I can contribute to the treasury, my life gets better because I live in Miami or I'm a supporter. Like, I think that concept is fascinating. And you could spend a lifetime, I think, doing just that. And I'm so glad that, some community members are coming together and trying to push this forward.
Yeah, and just to tie back to proof of transfer, and then I'd love to hand off the mic to Hank and then Dan. Just to tie it back to proof of transfer, city coins, like the lifeblood of city coins, and what makes it intriguing for cities is the fact that it has proof of transfer. Miners are constantly competing to forward a base currency, in this case, stacks, STX, to win the next block of a specific city coin. So every 10 minutes, for example, I might send 100 stacks into the proof of transfer contract for Miami coin to mint and earn Miami coin or earn the right to win Miami coin. Now, when I forward that base currency, how the Citicoin smart contract handles that base currency is it splits 30% of the total transferred base currency directly to the city, and then the remaining 70% goes directly to all the native currency holders, the Citicoin holders who have temporarily locked their Citicoins. So you know, this is that latter part is very similar to how Stacks is mined with Bitcoin and how Stacks is forwarded or Bitcoin is forwarded to Stacks holders. The only tweak that the CityCoins community made was diverting 30% of the funds to the city. What's interesting, as Muneeb mentioned, is you now have a market mechanism to negotiate with cities. I think that is, like, to me personally, it's like beyond fascinating. The kind of Trojan horsing Bitcoin into city governments in order to have a new lever for negotiating power, which previously didn't exist. So, you know, we said this on past calls where proof of transfer is like butter. It like makes everything better. And there is a variety of different flavors of proof of transfer that you can instantiate pretty easily on the Stacks blockchain, and it's pretty thrilling because if the currency that you're using is earning 10% Bitcoin yield automatically, that just makes everything better. Just to sorry, just to close the loop on that thought. But I'd love to just kind of ask Hank kind of like what his thoughts are on proof of transfer, ideas that he has that he thinks are interesting or in relation to proof of transfer, and then hear more from Dan about how he's using proof of transfer with his NFTs at Boom Wallet, which I believe are the first NFTs that sort of auto magically yield you Bitcoin.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. I'm Hank, and just the quick intro is that basically I worked at Hiro building out the Stacks blockchain, developer tools and wallets for the past 3 years, and then recently left to build a protocol on top of proof of transfer. And so the idea being that proof of transfer, as used by the base consensus mechanism of Stacks, is really, I mean, it's really well designed, and it's optimized for safety more than anything else. And so some of the design decisions that it's made make it a little bit more tricky to use within native smart contracts and in similar DeFi type yield mechanisms. And so we're building this kind of abstraction layer around stacking to hopefully allow any application or protocol to be able to harness stacking and the Bitcoin rewards that it provides in a super easy, friendly, capital efficient way. And so, answering your question around some of the great ideas, I mean, I think some of the people on this call here are doing it right now. So, Dan with stacking NFTs, I think that's fascinating. And I'm really excited to see, where that could go, especially in terms of, potentially splitting yield between the creator of an artwork and the owner of it. I'm very excited, with Arkadiko working on potentially earning yield on the stacks that you have as collateral. But then, I think it just goes on from there. I think there's interesting things. I think Jude brought this idea up to me that stacking, in a sense, is like a decentralized oracle because, based on the Stacks mining reward and the amount of Bitcoin contributed per block, it creates this, soft soft representation of the Stacks BTC price oracle. So how could you use that to be like one of the most decentralized price oracles that there is, purely based on human behavior versus like an external oracle? And then just, there's so many things from there. Like if you're a user that's stacking, whether it's with Stacks or with Miami Coin, what kind of derivatives could be built to hedge that position, because maybe you're taking some price risk. And so you could imagine, protocols that maybe we'll see in the next year where someone's willing to take an upfront fixed rate of yield in exchange for giving the other person the variable rate. All these, opportunities just spring up from this yield primitive. And that's kind of what I think of as of proof of transfer as a yield primitive. And when you have like a really strong source of yield, like stacking that, creates that has the APY that it does in Bitcoin, there's just tons of exciting things that I think we haven't even seen yet.
Dan, do you want to go into how you're using proof of transfer specifically with boomboxes?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Dan from Boom. Yeah, boomboxes are basically an abstraction of proof of transfer of the stacking protocol. Right now, I would say it's like the easiest implementation of that abstraction. But like Hank mentioned, there's like so many different potential use cases here and things we can do on top of this that this is really just the beginning. We're talking about proof of transfer as a superpower for developers. The way I've been describing it is it's a platform for development, right? And it's a platform for decentralized finance and these other options. So for us right now, we're stacking via the Freehold pool. If you mint an NFT, if you mint a boombox, your delegation goes to Freehold pool, and the rewards are paid out to the owner of the boombox at the end of the cycle. So you can transfer them, sell them, do whatever you want, just like a regular NFT. And then whoever owns that NFT, whatever address owns that NFT at the end of the cycle, will get the reward payout. We're already seeing things like Krieger's actually working on transferring one based on Bitcoin transactions. So that's really interesting. And as we get more complicated and more into the possibilities, as Muneeb mentioned, also there's like, potentially other wrapped Bitcoin type of options, or just doing Bitcoin directly for payouts and things like that. Creator rewards, that's already obviously in the works. That's another very kind of first use case kind of thing. But we're also looking at more complicated kind of transactions that we're trying to figure out how to pull off in terms of just like things you can do for access to, streaming media and websites and things like that. Also promotions, cross promotions with different applications. So yeah, there's just a huge number of possibilities, and we're having trouble trying to focus on like one at a time because there's so many options. I was done.
And that's a wrap. No, I'm kidding. Cool. What do we want to talk about next regarding proof of transfer? Yes. One interesting thing is, actually, I saw DeWalker, who's a listener on the call right now, post something about how much Bitcoin has gone through proof of transfer. I'm actually going to try to find that unless someone has that at the top of their head.
I believe the number like a week ago was like 95 Bitcoin in the 5 months.
Oh no, I think it's much higher than that. I think the number is like 477 Bitcoin went as rewards. So that's like, I don't know, $15 million, which is a lot. And then the total number of Bitcoin was maybe around 600, which is around roughly $20 million. So the difference here is that yes, some amount of Bitcoin is actually burned during the prepare phase, but the prepare phase is not that long. More Bitcoin was getting burned because there's a 4,000 reward slot limit on the protocol side. We did that. We want to be mindful of Bitcoin bandwidth. We don't want to be in a situation where half of Bitcoin transactions are basically stacks related. Right? We want to be mindful of how much bandwidth we use on the Bitcoin side. But then not everyone was claiming their slot in the early days, because the number of people who were stacking was obviously lower in the early months. So a bunch of slots were getting burned. I think the number of slots that are getting burned is much smaller now because we're approaching the limit where maybe all 4,000 on 4,000 slots would be occupied moving forward. I think.
I want to chip in real quick. This is Philip, by the way. We're building Arkadiko, which I can elaborate a bit about later. But I want to talk about the Bitcoin yield specifically that proof of transfer gives you. And if you're familiar with other, let's call it lending borrowing platforms on decentralized finance, you might have seen that a lot of yields have completely tanked. So you have yields on USDC, USDT that are like 2 to 4% at the moment. And that is decentralized. I'm not speaking about centralized platforms like BlockFi or part of Celsius, but so decentralized. And then if you look at proof of transfer, which is also in some sense a decentralized protocol, let's call it, that yields you Bitcoin. The last cycle, there was a yield of 13%. And on average, it gives you about 8 to 12%, which is amazingly unique considering that you get that paid in Bitcoin just by stacking your own stacks tokens. That's one thing I think just everyone in the audience should think about. If we are in at least the bearish sentiment of the market and your stacks are still yielding double-digit number, that's just amazing. But that's just my opinion, maybe. In addition to that, what we do at Arkadiko through proof of transfer is allowing you to borrow against that yield that you get in the future, so you can mint a stable coin against that future yield. Imagine you're depositing, 1,000 stacks tokens, and that yields X Bitcoin. Against that, you can just say, I now want $500 in my stable coin, use that stable coin, and your loan, let's call it a loan, is paid off automatically. So there's all kinds of things that you can now all of a sudden do with that double-digit yield, which is pretty amazing, I think. Well, we've talked about city coins, boomboxes, but I think there's endless amounts of applications, and this is all decentralized. For me, that's mind-blowing. Yeah.
Awesome. Should we get people to ask any questions?
Yep, we have a question coming in from Christian. Christian, go ahead.
This is probably a question for Dan from Boomboxes. So if you were to, for example, make a boombox from a video, could it be possible to have a video do the same thing as what your boomboxes are doing? And could it be used in a way to help, say, prevent people from copying the video and sending it out to their friends, let's say, because in essence they'd be sending away their boombox?
You can do the same types of operations with any specific type of media. The access controls would be basically having to check on whatever mechanisms you set up related to that. So, for instance, you can you could even do things like kind of tokenizing the NFT, right? Like we've seen happen on Ethereum, where owners or partial owners of the token get access to streaming content. That's a little bit more advanced than what we're doing right now. But yeah, those options are out there, definitely.
Yeah. Oh, do we have more questions? I was going to ask Dan a question, actually. Yeah, quick question for Dan. So can I use an NFT to represent a tranche of assets that are currently stacking and treat them like almost like a representation of like futures on that underlying asset that's yielding? Does that make sense? Essentially, have NFT be like an NFT would represent a large sort of tranche of other assets. Is that possible?
I think the hard part about that is you get into like what does the, I don't want to say ownership, but what does that tranche of other assets look like, and how do you provide proof that those things exist and that whoever controls them actually controls them the way you're expecting. But I mean, theoretically, yeah.
That's a
So,
long
I mean,
conversation. Cool.
Yeah, you could definitely do, the futures-based idea today. I mean, with boomboxes, assuming you had some other infrastructure for exchanging this future and creating a market for it. But you could definitely imagine a smart contract that once a price is agreed upon by, two parties, the smart contract takes custody of the boombox, say for 3 months. And during that time, the, original holder, say it was Dan selling to you, Dan would be earning the yield. And then after the 3 months are over, Patrick, you could claim the boombox or even just the stacks underneath it. And so then it's like a built-in, capital efficient cash and carry model where, Dan's done it up front. You've created your, future-based strategy to acquire stacks in the future. And Dan's still earning yield in the meantime.
And I just want to quickly chime in that this is a behavior that I'm seeing organically emerge in the stacks ecosystem. I've actually seen like business deals happen where people are negotiating over that, hey, let's say here's a stacks investment coming in, but they're negotiating who's going to get the yield for the first year or the second year or something like that, right? So this is already happening, like right now using pen and paper, not using a smart contract. But I've seen variations where it's like, okay, you can take the stacks now, but I get the yield for the first 12 months, and then I get 50% of the yield for the next 6 months. And I think that's super interesting, which means that people really value the yield. And as soon as you make it programmable, like as Hank was talking about, that, developers can actually program these transactions because yes, the asset is transferring, but the yield has a different ownership structure. I think things become very interesting again from a Lego blocks perspective. That now you have these Lego blocks to play with as a developer and as an app builder.
Yeah, I love that. And then kind of the inverse of that is like there's these other options of, you could imagine a token launching where Miami Coin is launching with, proof of transfer where, miners are spending the stacks. But maybe you could imagine a world where in order to earn this coin, then what users do is they lock up their stacks for some time period and just direct the yield to, the project. So maybe it's like Denver coin. So in this case, users are locking up stacks. The Bitcoin is going to Denver. The user gets their stacks back at the end of the year, plus, some Denver coin. It's like a slight tweak on the City Coins model where the user doesn't even have to give up anything, but the other side of the party is earning Bitcoin yield in the process. I think it's kind of like a win-win.
Totally.
Yeah.
I had this random idea that's like it's half baked. I think I thought of it like half an hour ago, or maybe like before the call. Essentially, like what you're effectively doing there is having people delegate their stacks to a mining contract to mint a new coin, and only those that delegate can do so. Is that correct? Like a good?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Cool. So what one thing I was thinking was imagine if only people who held $SFO, like San Francisco, could do that function for a specific coin for a specific action. Maybe the action is like funding investigative journalism to track the homelessness problem and the crime problem in San Francisco, and write about it. And you can have like a sort of like a developer fund that instead of a developer fund, it's like a journalist fund, and those folks get paid out over like into perpetuity, effectively. But is only sort of like access control mined, but by the base currency being San Francisco. So I think what's interesting there is like having like proof of hodl, proof of skin in the game to fund specific initiatives is kind of interesting. And again, it's like totally half baked, but just something that came to mind.
I think there's some very potentially interesting tax consequences here as well, because if I'm not selling stacks, but I'm actually lending them, or I'm actually just locking them, then I don't have any capital gains. Right? And similarly, if I'm not, I know the yield part is different people have different tax perspective on it, but the most conservative thing viewpoint you can take is like, oh, it's income. Well, interesting, I support a cause, but instead of like making donation, I'm just going to redirect Bitcoin earnings to that cause, because then you're effectively not getting the income, but they're getting the donations, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you're getting a new asset. Right?
So technically you could like lock up stacks and finance, say, like a film project, and then the film project, once it's done, becomes like a boombox, which would have a yield paid to whoever invested their initial yield.
Oh, I think could do for sure. I think we like departed from the NFT conversation a few minutes ago. If I'm correct, I don't know.
Yeah,
but it's kind of similar in that, like, maybe you get the video at the end. Sorry, I don't want to cut you off, Muneeb.
Yeah, that's the same. I was going to say the same thing. I think you can start applying these concepts, and I'll take that back to connect the dots a little bit. That I think Patrick had that description that you could think of stacks as a Bitcoin bond. I know it's not, because technically it's a separate asset. It can fluctuate in value separately, but in some ways, like it's a Bitcoin yielding asset. And what we are really talking about over here is how to separate the yield in a programmable way from the underlying asset. Right? So can you redirect the yield independent of the asset? Like, asset is locked somewhere, but the yield is going to someone else. And what type of smart contract logic on Lego blocks can enable these different types of things? Right? And I think the most interesting piece of that to me is these types of Lego blocks actually don't exist in crypto right now. And once they start existing, I'm a big believer in, the kind of ideas that can come from a crowd of developers would always be better than anything we can cook up. Right? So you just give them the Lego blocks, and you just focus on building these Lego blocks, and then just amazing things are going to happen, because the creativity of the crowds, and especially developers, is going to be a lot higher than any room we can assemble actually.
Great. And yeah, do you want to go ahead with your question?
Yes, thank you for the amazing talk. My first question is for Patrick. During the beginning of this space, he mentioned any 20 different stacks address can activate the mining for city coins. Does that mean that 20 separate addresses, stacks addresses, can mine any city coins, or?
It's got to be directed at, right, I'm happy to answer the question. So it's got to be directed at one specific city coin. So Miami coin is the first city coin going live on August 3rd at 1 p.m. Eastern. And essentially there'll be a time period where 20 miners can signal the beginning of mining. And then a little bit of time after that, then actual mining begins, and actual Miami coins are minted.
Cool. Thank you for the clarification. The next one's for the stacks team. I understand proof of transfer can be powerful for the developers, but my concern and I'd like to know what programs or what Stacks is doing to organically develop developers network. I understand would like to attract from the already existing networks and then bring them to Stacks, but what's being done to organically grow?
Yeah, I can maybe take that one, right? So I think one really important thing to understand about the Stack ecosystem versus some other crypto projects is it is actually a decentralized ecosystem. Right? Like when we say it's decentralized, we actually mean, right? Like there are now 30 plus entities in the ecosystem, and we went through a very thorough process of actually, like Patrick, for example, is in an independent entity doing whatever he wants to do. Like when he started that entity, I don't think that anything to do with QX Lite or anything like that was even on the table. And now he's interested in that and he's pursuing that. So there is no stacks team, really, right? And I think we share that with Bitcoin. Like no one can really represent Bitcoin. And obviously, the team at Hiro did a lot of the initial public infrastructure building, but then we designed it in a way that, just like Patrick was talking about, independent miners coming and activate the system. Independent miners came in and activated the network, and Hiro is not, like we are now a developer tooling company. So the better question to ask here is that what are the different entities doing? And then those entities actually have different strategies. There is no single strategy. And I am a big believer that that's actually a healthy thing, because that means there's more experimentation, and we'll see what strategy works better. Like I can give you some examples. Like at Hiro, which is a company, and we have a business model of actually there's a platform that we are building that we think can be valuable to developers and that we generate revenue from it. At Hiro, our strategy is more towards focusing on developers that are currently not in crypto. Right? So we think that the blue ocean of developers is outside of crypto. We want those developers to come and use, Hiro tooling. We want Hiro to be the gateway through which, they discover Clarity language, and then because we have a business interest in doing it. In another entity like the Stacks Foundation, they're trying to build Clarity courses, or maybe they decide that they want. I'm just making this up. I actually don't know what they're doing, but let's say they decide that, hey, we want to pull developers from the Ethereum ecosystem, and maybe they want to educate them between differences between Clarity and Solidity, for example. I can tell you that Hiro is not doing that. Like I just don't believe that it's a high ROI thing, because I just think that there are so many high quality developers outside of crypto right now, and especially like people who are really sophisticated engineers who can appreciate the design decisions of Clarity language, that I would rather go and try and talk to them. But some other entity might have a different thing. I know it's a long answer, but I think I know I've seen you around in the ecosystem, so I think it's important to understand that this ecosystem is actually different. It's not the case that there's a single company there, and that company has some sort of a overarching strategy, and that company is going to decide how they're going to attract it, because it's really not the case. Like, I think different people are going to do different things, and then we'll basically see what